Hey, David T.S. Wood here, and welcome to my Extra Mile. My comment winner this week is Kim Primatic. She said, I welcome the solo shows. Yes, I've been doing some solo shows. I love this topic so much. She was referring to the decluttered mind and the 5-minute exercise. So if you haven't seen that one, go look at it. She said, divine timing and sending peace. It was a much longer comment, but thank you, Kim. My show this week, it's just incredible. This gentleman hails from just very, very close to where I lived in England. He's just outside Cambridge in England. This gentleman has grown up with a disability, and his story is remarkable. Whether you're disabled or non-disabled, his advocacy, the narrative that he creates through his marketing, and his connection to large companies, and sort of viewing the world through a prism, a lens that's so refreshing. You're going to love listening to this guy. Enjoy the show. We'll definitely see you on the other side. Don't forget to get involved with the comments. Let us know what's going on. Let me know subjects you're interested in hearing from, or guests. And of course, click on here, subscribe and push the like button and all these different things. They will help. And enjoy the incredible Martyn Sibley. And we'll definitely see you on the other side. Hey Martyn, I'm so excited. When I get to know someone on a call like this, like you and I haven't really spoken, and so, but I can already feel the little we have spoken. I can feel that connection with you. I think we just share a lot of the same passions. I can just feel it oozing out of you. But thank you for being on the show.
Thank you for having me, David. Good to be here.
Let's start with this sort of the obvious, because I asked you this question a moment ago. With the sort of world the way it is, and PC and what to say and how to say it, you've grown up with a disability and really an advocate for disabled people. What is the term that you use, or what's the term you like people to use when they're referring to disabled people or disability?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think language can be quite a sensitive one. It's quite a personal preference, and within communities, it's been the way of being liberated and empowered through taking reclamation of language. Even when we look at civil rights in other areas like race and gender as well. So I'm in the UK, and generally it's understood that the social model of disability is the sort of framework to look for inclusion through. So I have a medical condition which is called spinal muscular atrophy. That means that I'm in a wheelchair all of my waking hours. I have a care team that do really a lot of the physical things I need help with, even a bit of help in the night when I need to move and be more comfortable. But the reason we say disabled people that way around is that we believe we're disabled by the barriers of society. And those barriers come through the environment, through attitudes, and through policy and procedure. And the more disabled people are a part of designing the environment and attitudes and policies, the more those barriers are pulled down, or we know how to overcome them. So ultimately, I won't be a disabled person, I'll just be a person, because there's no more barriers out there.
I got so many goosebumps on that. We could stop the show right here. I just learned something. I mean, it's like the philosophy. I got tears in my eyes and I got goosebumps all down my back. That's so powerful because, as an able-bodied person, I'm not sure if that's what we call ourselves, but to live in a world where it's set up that everyone's just a person, it's such a beautiful concept, and it's such an easy concept. But if the people designing everything have no understanding of what people with any kind of disability are going through, how can they design a world that fits everyone? Because you're not saying let's make it accessible to disabled people. We're saying let's design a world for everyone, right?
Everyone, exactly, yeah.
You
said about
drop the mic, Martyn. Let's get out of here.
We're done.
We're good. We're all done.
You mentioned the term about is it able-bodied or not. I think another point to make is that one of the barriers I've faced as a wheelchair user is the fear and the political correctness thing of getting it wrong. And so I think language has a point and a place, but it's more about connecting as people. And I'd rather someone says that a word that is not theoretically like from that prism of social model, but actually it's about coming from the heart and the good intent. But yeah, we would say non-disabled people in the sense there aren't the barriers, but it doesn't take away the fact that I still need the wheelchair and the care team because of the genetic health condition that I've got.
Yeah, let's go back in time, because I wonder, and thank you for that distinction and that nuance. I want to, before I go actually back, I want to go back to sort of your early life. And, I haven't talked to you about any kind of questions. I haven't got anything written down. I mean, it's just, the thing is that a real conversation, it just spawns like it has already. But, is the world got too PC? Because I kind of worry that, because people only know when they know. And if they don't know, then obviously some people can be mean, or some people, are completely insensitive, or some people are just assholes. I mean, that can exist. But I think for a lot of people like myself, I struggle between, being so scared to speak about a group of people, whether it's about ethnicity or whether it's about disability. Yeah. And so it always feels like, well, if everyone's afraid to speak about it, then how do we learn about it? Do you know what I'm saying? It's so rigid.
Totally.
Do you agree or not?
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, as we'll get into a bit later, I'm running a marketing agency, but it's basically a vehicle for my life mission, which is inclusion of disabled people. And when we talk to these big brands we're working with, and we explain that 1.3 billion of the population have a disability, the spending power of the disabled population is like $8 trillion globally per year, that is. So we're waking businesses up to the business case of inclusion. Of course, there are other, reasons, like it's the right thing to do, but the business case
time.
Yeah, exactly. But the business case is powerful, right? Because that's what businesses are set up to engage around, and you can get that win-win. But I think the biggest barrier I face when I'm selling our value proposition is the fear. They're scared of having disabled people in the marketing and the advertising for the fear that some one person in the disabled population is going to take umbrage with it, and that's going to ruin their brand forever. And I think that's a macro level for businesses, but it's the same for individuals, that rather than say something and put their foot in it, they'd actually avoid the conversation altogether. And that's not the right answer for anybody.
Yeah, I really, and I can see that sort of quandary, because I attempt, I think it's because I come from a kind world. I think you said something earlier which really struck me, is that when our intentions are clean, the things that come out of our mouth, even if they could be taken wrong, the person receiving it can see that there's a genuine kindness involved in the language. So then the education process is easy, A, because the conversation's in front of you, and B, there's a genuine connection. I think you mentioned that too, about the connection between people, right?
Yeah, and there's a responsibility in the disability community, and again, we can see parallels with race, gender, sexuality as well. But like, there are people I know with a disability that, for understandable reasons, but there's a victim mentality, and it's the world has just been set up to be bad, and it's not designed, like we said at the beginning, not designed for disabled people. But you have to go on that journey with society. And when there are people that just call everybody out on the language and get quite militant and quite feisty, and that's part of the problem, as well as people being scared of getting it wrong.
Yeah, it's interesting. My son taught me something. I did a triathlon one time, and the gentleman, my son at the time was maybe 8, he's 20 now, but his legs were missing really, really high. I mean, almost to the point where you think, well, how, it almost looks like they're at his waist. It was that so much, right? But he raced, he was actually, his wheelchair was next to my bike. And so he does the triathlon, like, so in the swim, of course, he uses his arms. When he gets out to do the bike, he's using a wheelchair, whereas, like with a sprocket. And then for the run, he's using a racing wheelchair. And I'm thinking, here he is doing the whole thing with just his arms. But here's what I learned from my son. My son walked up to him and said this, right up to him. He's just, first time he met him, he says, "Can I ask you a question?" And the guy said, "Yeah." He said, "How'd you lose your legs?" Yeah. And it was so beautiful, because we sat, and that's how we connected. And he'd been hit by a train. And I just remember that moment, learning that from my 8-year-old. And that's what
Yeah.
I've always done now. When I meet anyone with anything going on, I like to go up and say, can I ask you a question? Do you mind
Absolutely.
sharing your story with me? Because I find that, 100% of the people that I've ever said that to, from the well of kindness. And remember, I learned this from an 8-year-old, and it just opened up this. And of course, we raced together, and he came in 1 minute behind me.
Wow, amazing.
It's amazing, yeah. So
There's two points I thought there. Was one around this guy acquired the disability. So there's quite a lot around, I think 20% of disabled people are born with whatever kind of condition has resulted with the physical disability. But 80% it's acquired. And as you get into older age, like there's a higher incidence. So there's something about maybe society ignores and pushes disability away because it's a kind of glimpse that anyone may have to face that life, that circumstance. And I don't mean that in some sort of weird scaremongering way. It's just a fact that maybe that's why we're not as engaged in something that we don't want to face head on. Whereas, as you say, your approach is absolutely the right way. It's just to take it head on, And the other point that came to mind is about children. I was on a train before COVID, a few months back, and this kid was like, wow, Mom, look at that guy's wheelchair. Can I get one for Christmas? And I think that innocence and that openness of children is really the key that adults need to have more of as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've got lots of things coming through my mind of my different times where I've been taught in a not taught like someone sits down and teaches you, taught by the moment about my own thinking. And I posted these on social media, different stories over the years. But I was at a driving range and I turned around and there was a young guy, and I was guessing he had cerebral palsy just because of the way he was speaking and the way his hands were moving. And he's sitting there, and I was wondering, why is he all alone? And I was like, my brain went immediately to, I wonder if he's lost. And I started chatting to him. I said, what you doing? I said, I'm just hanging out. I said, you okay? Yeah. And then after a while, after we chatted like around, he said, no, I'm just here to play golf. And here I am looking at, and in my world, I'm like, well, and this wheelchair was one that he could stand up in. And so the wheelchair reconfigured. It was like this crazy thing. And before long, here he is standing there. And the only thing he needed help with was someone put the ball on the tee for him. And he was hitting it straight down the middle. And here's my assumptions. This is, again, going back to my own assumptions, thinking he needed my help. Right? Where in fact, he was just there to golf and he's kicking my ass on the driving range. Right?
And I mentioned that I feel that marketing is the vehicle by which I'm trying to make the world more inclusive, right? And it's actually about narrative and storytelling and stereotype. And, if I gave you £1 or $1 for every time someone came up to me drunk in a club and was like, hey, can you have sex? Like, talk about, going head on. And I think, in Britain, there's a day-to-day sober people are not as wanting to engage in any parts of it, in an uncomfortable conversation, but then have a few drinks, a bit of alcohol, and then everyone's like, oh, what's your sex life like? How do you have sex? But I think, it's in the end, it's about changing those stereotypes of what someone can or can't do based on a perception.
Well, something that strikes me as we're talking, Martyn, which I love about you, and again, this is just that immediate feeling, is when you approach marketing, and you have a master's in marketing, which is great, but you approach marketing with this sensitivity without the, like you say, it's not militant. It's not like, hey, people are wrong. It's like this real guidance. And even the way you talk about companies is saying, hey, they have a bottom line. If we can show them there's this 1.8 billion that could impact their bottom line, and we can show them how to access that, versus, let's show them how to treat and set up their stores to be blah, 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 blah. And I'm just saying that sort of honey or a stick type of approach is that you have this honey approach, which is really about the dialogue and the storytelling, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I was really privileged to interview Seth Godin on my podcast a year or two ago, and he's like the godfather of this point that if you can, through the narrative, you change the narrative, you can have so many consequential social good factors.
Awesome. Great guy. Let's go back a little bit, because, there is this distinction that you brought up again, which is the distinction of becoming disabled or having an accident or something happening and obviously being born with a genetic situation that you grow up with. When you were born, was it like as soon as you were born, your parents understood there was something that you would be dealing with for the rest of your life?
Yeah, so I was essentially born with this, because that distinction, again, it does get very technical in a way, but the disability is the social issue, whereas I would actually say my impairment is the spinal muscular atrophy. But essentially the spinal muscular atrophy is genetic. So my mum and dad, they don't have a disability, but they've passed those genetics on to me to then be born with this particular condition. They didn't know as soon as I was born. It's quite funny, that phraseology, if you were born in a wheelchair, like would obviously be pretty phenomenal if you actually came out with your mum in a wheelchair. Exactly. It's like,
little baby, little training wheel on the back.
Totally. Yeah. But I was 3 when I had my first power chair that was powerful. Like, it was quite a machine, and it gave me my independence to drive around and play with my fellow friends and everything. So I was still pretty young when I had a wheelchair, but it was about 18 months when I wasn't then developing as much as my cousins and other friends of the same age. So mum and dad took me to the doctor, referred to the hospital. I had got a little scar on the top of my thigh where they took a biopsy because they suspected it was something like muscular dystrophy or spinal muscular atrophy. And yeah, that was proven to be the case. And so for me, I'm blissfully unaware really of those moments, but I know for mum and dad, it was a big deal that, the way they'd imagine having their first child and the life that would be lived was obviously turned upside down. And also it was quite a bleak prognosis. I was born in 1983, and it was, sort of living to adulthood isn't guaranteed, and he's never going to walk, and there's all these risk factors around chest infections, and the medical side was not very positive. But obviously they got home and found support groups and gradually found answers to those barriers that I'm now more cognitive of.
I think about a parent, I have 2 boys and, that moment where, a baby's born and, it's kind of revealed, unless you know beforehand, which again with science today and ultrasounds, people sometimes are aware of things prior. But I just wonder, what advice would you give? Because there's a lot of parents who will experience this situation in different forms, I recently worked with Nick Wojciech. Nick has no arms and no legs, right? And just, listen to his story and again, getting to know him intimately. But I wonder, what's the advice you'd give to parents about that moment, where the doctor's telling you this thing, and like you said, in 83, the prognosis was so bleak. And what would you like to say to them?
Yeah, I think in a way that sort of wanting to pass on different messages to both disabled people and parents is where I got into blogging later on. It was for that reason. But what I would say is that, life will be different, but you should still dream for the biggest, go for the biggest mountaintops, because everything is possible, and you may take longer to get there. You may go sort of meander around different routes to get there, but ultimately you can still live out all the dreams you want as a family and as an individual with a disability, regardless. I mean, I think there's obviously certain health conditions that very much impact the ability to travel and do some of the adventures I've done, and so we have to just have that compassion for certain groups where there is a limit with energy, or there's a lot of pain. But even then, I still think that there are lots of cheesy and get out the guitar and start singing. But
Martyn, sorry, you just cut out there for about 3 seconds. I just want you to go back, just
Sure.
to finish what you were just saying there. Just go back about 3 or 4 seconds, but you just finished that sentence again. Sorry.
I can't remember exactly what was.
No, exactly. I was going to say, but I wonder if I can remember. Oh, it doesn't matter. Okay. So finish what you were saying then. Sorry.
Yeah, I think the overall point is that within any life, it's valuable, and there are beautiful experiences to be had regardless of adverse circumstances.
Sure. Another question I have, and again, I really want to get back into your story, the part of it as you were growing up. But the story, the thing I noticed is that some people's ability to accept and thrive in the situation, the hands or the cards they're dealt, I'm not sure how much of it's family based, how the family treats it, and there are other people who sort of, and I see this with people who have, especially who have accidents. I met a guy who recently, and I did a whole podcast on this one too. I saw him at an art show, and he'd broken his back, and he was showing me the photographs of his recovery. And twice he had these, I think he got septicemia or something like that. But he almost died a couple of times. And there's this whole thing where, at one point he looks like he'd come from, Biafra in Africa, just like he looked. But there he is sitting in this wheelchair, completely strong. And his wife said to me, and he was there with his 10-year-old and his wife. And she said, you know what is interesting? I said, what? She said, the moment he opened his eyes, he looked at me, he said, don't worry, everything's going to be fine. And she said that not once in this whole journey has he ever not said that. And now he's back competing. He was in the X Games, and now he's competing in the Para Games, right?
Nice.
But it's just this, how important is that part? And how much experience do you have with seeing that some people have chosen, some people, again, I'm trying to say this correctly, but this idea of, thriving versus, surviving, you must see that a lot, right?
Yeah, I mean, we could go for hours on this one, because I think...
Well, we'll do two shows.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've debated that a lot for my own sort of life in terms of, is it nature or nurture? That I feel I am a naturally sort of happy-go-lucky, positive, optimistic person. And so is there some element of genetics there? Is it my mum is very of that way as well, so maybe there's a lot of her passing that on in a nurture way. But the last few years I've definitely been exploring my spirituality a lot more. I've growing up kind of pushed away religion, and I'm still don't feel I have a religion, but I'm definitely in the last 5 years on my personal development journey very aware of a faith, of something that is beyond, shall we say. And like that, when you said that guy, as soon as he opened his eyes, said he'd be okay, like, where does that come from? And that's why I say we could go on a lot of tangents on this one.
Yeah. Well, it's just, again, there's these experiences. So take me back to that, young Martyn, and sort of, especially in '83, because we have to go back. People see the world today, and it's so that everything's so much easier. I say easier, that's the terrible, but you know what I'm saying. But technology is there. Back in '83, even the prognosis, there was, like you say, it was very dark and bleak. What was it like for you growing up? Did you feel, because a lot of people who are non-disabled are putting themselves constantly in comparison and are not thriving or happy. Here they are, they look beautiful, but they're looking in the mirror and they're finding faults with the pimple or this and that, and they spend so much time fixated on what's wrong with them that they're not really stepping into the world. Was it hard not to be in comparison when you were in a wheelchair and the other kids are running around? Or?
Yeah, probably the teen years were more of that moment of where you are more, the hormones are running wild, and you are comparing a bit more to I've got stepbrothers and cousins and school friends, and particularly the guys, they all seem to just be meeting girls and having sex in abundance, and it felt like that wasn't happening for me at the same time. And was that because I'm in a wheelchair? And so there was a lot of would I ever meet someone in a love sense that would accept me, inverted commas. And then actually, as it turned out, I went off to university. I had the best time in all senses of the word at university. And
sex life was good, apparently.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. I'm feeling nostalgic now. But it was, very, very good times. And I guess I realized that it wasn't the chair that would stop someone from falling in love with me. It was, it was my own attitude to life. And I can happily say I'm engaged now. I've been with my partner for 8 years, hence the, those days at uni were different to these days now. But we're getting married, and I've really found my my true soulmate. And so that was a narrative, I suppose, to keep using that word a bit today, but that sort of strand around sex and relationships was a bigger thing, because it felt that society presumed I didn't have those desires, but just because I'm in a wheelchair is like a knee-jerk reaction to presume that if you're in a wheelchair, that's not a thing that happens. And so I was definitely fighting against those sort of worldly views, but yeah, ultimately realized that it was only within those sort of sex relationship stuff would happen. But of course, yeah, similarly, that's a journey I've been on with studies, with employment, with entrepreneurship, with traveling the world, you know. So those teenage years were very defining in learning about myself, I would say.
Yeah, I can see that. And I actually got the sort of sense of you as a 3-year-old when you got that first high-powered chair, is that you kind of had the edge. The other kids are like, oh my God, I want that chair, right? I mean, it would have been completely different from the teens where they're going out with the girls and you're, feeling that isolation, right?
Yeah, like when we were sort of, well, yeah, because in the UK, as you know, we got the primary and secondary school set up. So I think secondary, there were just those, I had to go further away because the local school wasn't wheelchair accessible. And yeah, just a lot more challenging. But at primary, the kids used to like jump a ride on the back of the chair and we play Formula One cars. And I was at the local village school, and it was all, everyone in the village was very supportive. Like if the government weren't able to support the funding of a wheelchair, the community would all get involved and do fundraising. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I'm of a generation where I was able to go to mainstream schools. So there were some other disabled people at the secondary school, but lots more that weren't disabled. And I think that's another big reason that my sort of age group have been more able to go through school, uni, employment, whereas prior, that segregation of housing and schooling, even if you ended up getting okay grades, you weren't socialized in an inclusive way. And I think that makes a huge difference.
Yeah, I can see that. I can hear every woman listening right now. We have a lot of women. Majority of my listeners are women. Want to know about this love story. So your soulmate, just talk about just how you met and how that transpired. I mean, because you're talking about not just meeting and falling in love, you're talking about a soulmate. And that, to me, when you speak now, you have very clear and definitive language. And I love that, because it's, you don't waste words. It's not like you're not using this sort of, so when you say soulmate, I get this real sense of your togetherness, right?
Yeah, absolutely. She's just coming in the door and the dog barks. So I just quickly muted myself then. But no, absolutely. Yeah. Like it, I just kind of gave that potted summary of the preamble of the teen years, then the uni hedonism, and then the sort of 20s. I was in London and searching for something a lot more meaningful. And then we're a day apart. So I'm a toy boy by one day, literally. And we met through mutual friends when we both lived in London. And it was one of those, the first moment we met, we just didn't stop talking. And we talked about, anything and everything under the sun. And then when we became a couple, we've done road trips all around Europe many times. And we've been to Japan, and like we've, just explored the world and adventures. But even now we're a bit more with our bungalow and a garden and our golden retriever dog, but we still have adventures and amazing days together, just in the small things as well.
Yeah, you mentioned that. That's the thing we did talk about, because we're recording this. If you're watching this in 2021 or 2022, we're recording this during COVID. And you're talking about your passion for traveling, which is where one of my many passions is travel. But you're saying right now that because the element of the health risk as well, the added component, because there are people traveling. And I find this interesting, actually. So many people come up to me and say, oh, we can't travel. I said, well, have you checked the country? Oh, my dream was to go to this place this September. And I'll say, well, did you check to see if it's open? Because I just spent a month in Greece. But
Right.
the difference with you, though, is that because there's a higher health risk, you really are being asked to stay. And you're choosing, not even being asked. I think it's your choice, because there's that added component that COVID would be very, very detrimental to your existence, I'm guessing, right?
definitely. I mean, on travel in itself, it's not the most straightforward of activities to do when you have to fly with a wheelchair. So like I'm in my chair all day, all my waking hours I'm in my wheelchair. But when I fly, I have to be lifted by a couple of assistants at the airports who I've invariably never met before. I've flown so much that the people at Stansted actually know me now. But there's a lot of people on different shift patterns and I know them all. But generally, at the other end, particularly, you've not met them, you've not had a practice run. And being lifted, I'm not particularly tall or heavy, but it's still, a very personal space. And it's just quite a stressful procedure, basically. And on top of that, they have to put the wheelchair in the hold. And over the years, they've dropped the chair and the chair's been damaged. And the wheelchair I'm in at the moment, fortunately, we get funding for it to pay for it, but it's £20,000. So wow. They're not cheap, bits of kit. And so generally flying is quite stressful. But the reason I've always overcome that is I love the new countries, new people, new food, new languages. I've lived in Spain on and off for years and just can't get enough of it. But back to the COVID point, someone with a health condition like mine was told by the government to stay home until the 1st of August. So there was not enforced, but very heavily suggested that that's the best thing to do. Since then, it's not so much like don't leave the house, but you spent 4 months being told it's really dangerous if you go out. Yeah. And then suddenly it's like, okay, off you go, you're fine now, even though the virus is still there. So I've got a balanced approach to all this. I'm not getting sucked in by the media. I'm not living in fear every day. I'm cracking on. I'm taking the dog out for nice walks and seeing some of the family. But yeah, I think with the stress I always normally have, and then COVID on top, I just thought, you know what, if I don't go far for this year, that's fine, and I'll get back into it next year kind of thing.
Talk to me about the travel, because obviously not everyone has that same passion we do. And when you were talking about that, it's that I love walking into the unknown space with the unknown language, unknown food, unknown culture, unknown nuances. And to me, that's just, I couldn't imagine a better feeling than that second where you're just stepping into this whole new world, right? And now with travel, the world's got very, very small because travel is quite inexpensive. But talk to me about the early days of your traveling. What was it? What sparked you to want to be an adventurer and a traveler, especially knowing that the complexity of taking a wheelchair and all the other sort of things you have to go through makes it, 10 times more challenging than I could just say, I pack my bag and I'm off, right? So.
Yeah, I think ultimately in more the sort of last 10 years, there's been a convergence of the passion to travel, the passion to make content in a general way. Like I always used to watch travel shows and dream of being a sort of travel journalist. And then when blogging and social media became a thing, you're able to do it without being asked by the BBC to do it. You just do it on your own. But I've been lucky to be all expenses paid, flown around to lots of countries to kind of test their accessible tourism offering. So yeah, the convergence has been the love of travel and adventure, making content, making a difference, and I suppose creating that impact around disability. The earlier days were that mum and dad did all the hard work and I was blissfully unaware of how much went into it. And then, so we went on holidays, but I wasn't driving that to happen. When I was at university, I had a kind of month or two in between the bachelor's and the master's. And I thought, yeah, I'd really like to go somewhere without family. And I'll go with a couple of my care assistants, which invariably you sort of become friends as well, right? Yeah. So I managed to sort out the funding for the care assistants, used an agent to sort out the flights and everything. But I thought, you know what, other side of the world sounds good to me. So my first solo independent trip was Australia, and I had bit more than a month away, and we stopped in Singapore for the layover. And talk about goosebumps at the beginning of the talk, when I still remember that feeling as I was in hot, humid Singapore, and we went into the street and bought the street food, and I'm eating, yeah, this exotic, different food to what I'd ever known before, off of a large green leaf in the middle of Singapore. And I thought, wow, that this is exploration, this is adventure.
Yeah, that's funny. I can taste it. I can smell it even, right? I love street
Yeah,
food, but yeah, you know, when, and we're definitely going to do another show if that's all right with you. And I'd love to come on your
of course,
podcast as well if you ever want another guest in there. But you
definitely.
know, when I think about the listener right now, I want to just sort of give them some more understanding about how they can contribute or participate in either understanding or conversation or activism, whatever it is. What's the message that you most want people to hear, and the one that you keep driving home to just the average person in the street, or the person listening?
Yeah, that's a really cool question. I mean, I think some of the advice I would give around not overthinking and being fearful, just trust that if you're coming into interaction with someone with a disability, and it's from a good place, which of course it's going to be, right, then just to have that interaction and not overthink it and over worry. So that's a kind of direct, if and when you're, speaking with someone with a disability. The way I'd probably frame the bigger picture, because we're faced now with so many different social issues and causes that need to be fixed and sorted, it can become quite overbearing. And I think that one of the most powerful ways for disability and inclusion is to look at it around sustainability in the environment. And more now, there are businesses that are looking to be sustainable and environmental. And that's because consumers will only buy from those businesses and look for those particular products and services. And so we are seeing a shift now where businesses are starting to look at employing more disabled people into the workforce and to be more open and accessible in terms of goods and service. So I think that general awareness of what brands and governments as well are doing for disabled people and helping to hold them accountable as citizens, as voters, as consumers, that's the way that we're going to move the needle in the long run.
Yeah, I love that. If we go back to the opening sentence, almost, about, it's not about being disabled, it's about being people. It's setting up the world for all people, which means that, beyond the scope of even disabilities, there's that, when we have that one concept of setting up a world for all people, it really changes how we think about the entire world, right?
Yeah, it's representation. Have you seen Hamilton, David?
No, I haven't. No.
Okay, so I've watched it a month ago and I've got a bit addicted to it, and I think it's because I love history, I love R&B and hip hop, and I love a hero's journey, and it's got all of that in it, right?
So is it a TV series?
No, it's a Broadway show that they've shown it on Disney Plus, and it's been in London in the West End, but it's a Broadway show basically.
I'll put it on my list. I'll definitely go see it. Yeah.
It's to do with the founding fathers of the USA, and but the point here is that there's a song in there. It's a musical, a song about being in the room where it happened, and the problem for disabled people, but actually it's all about representation. That when you're looking to build a new town or make up a new business, whatever it might be, it's just having all the different voices in the room, and the more representation there is of all of humanity, the more whatever that thing is will be better for all, and that's a win-win-win for society, government, business, and disabled people.
Yeah, I want to talk, if we move away from the disability, because and just talk about philosophy, your philosophy of life and your approach and your stance, your language, this ability to see through a lens of inclusion, and which I can sense in you, is that it's not like it doesn't feel like you're fighting something. It feels like you're flowing with something, and there's a very different energy around that. Understanding that things take time, understanding education, has to be a win-win, like you talked about, and not a one-sided approach. So there's so many lessons that I'm hearing that I hope the listeners are really picking up those nuances. But you know, when we talk about mindset of the average person listening, you know, many of them listening, you know, have not faced a disability in any way, but the disability that they're facing is the one in between their ears. And what's the lessons you've learned about, you know, the inner world sort of creating the outer world? The fact that and you mentioned that actually at university, and you realized at that moment when you know it came to dating, it wasn't the wheelchair. It was how you were thinking about yourself and the projection you were projecting. I'm getting goosebumps again. Projecting out this energy that was getting a result you didn't want, and when you shifted that energy internally, here you are about to marry the love of your life. Talk about it, because I think that is such a big conversation that we could spend months on.
Yeah, no, it's a massive part. I mean, I think I've always had some innate self-awareness, so I know if I'm feeling a bit down, and I dig into why I'm feeling a bit down. And so I think I've always had this sort of general practice, almost to get technical sounding, but I've always done it very naturally in sort of childhood and early adulthood. And as I said, I have got a bit of that positive disposition as well. But when I got sort of probably 3 years ago, I had co-founded a business with a friend of mine, and it was all around travel. And we ultimately sold it to Airbnb. So it was a really big deal that we literally had this little startup, and we called it the Airbnb for disabled people, and then they acquired it. But I also went through a bit of a burnout and a bit of a roller coaster with the friendship with the co-founder. We'd known each other since we were kids. And that was when I really sought some kind of external support in this way. And actually, it's what's led us to be on the podcast is our mutual friend, Andrea, who I've been sort of doing some work with her around isogenics in terms of looking after my own body and general health. But I met her at a Mind Valley conference, and it was at this Mind Valley conference where I got a lot more upskilled and aware of meditation and mindfulness, and just generally finding actual tools that it's fine not to always be positive and always be happy. And it's kind of good to have those darker moments, because from that mini death, more amazingness sprouts out later.
Yeah. Well, again, it's like if you think of a song sheet, you know, it's the space between the song, or the notes that make the music, right? You know, so it's kind of, I know that philosophy, and again, you know, that sort of the rhythm of life. And I love the fact, the awareness there. But what is that, you know, because I read something that you'd written, that was sort of dream big, understand your barriers, plan your way forward, keep going, always have fun, and you've got to believe. I just encapsulating that there about dreaming big. What's, again, if we go back into what you've learned, A, living the life you've led, B, the fact that you really are a citizen of the world. You're not, you know, confined to one culture. A lot of people look through a lens of their own culture. So everything, and I see that because I grew up in England as well. In fact, what part of England are you from?
Near Cambridgeshire.
Yeah, me too, because I was so Sudbury in Suffolk.
Okay, yeah, really close.
So you're just down the road. Well, I lived just outside Bury St Edmunds, actually, at one point, a little tiny village there. So you're only, I mean, you're just up the road.
Yeah.
I had a feeling you were close. But I forgot what I was saying about the British mindset. What was I talking about?
Well, there's sort of one, I think it was like the global village, and the kind of, there's no borders around the world.
Yeah, you know, but sort of, you know, growing up sort of in sort of England, and you know, I noticed I see travelers from the UK, and I don't see it as much anymore, but predominantly it was always that they wanted to bring England with them. And, you know, they wanted to have the same food, and all the hotels were being built in the south of Spain. You said you lived in Spain too. I used to live in a little town called Estepona between Malaga and Gibraltar. So I love Spain, but this kind of idea that so many people, when they go places, they want to bring their comfort with them. Yeah, you and I have discovered the beauty of what lies just outside that comfort zone is really where the juice is. And would you want to talk a little bit about that, this kind of living with the juice, and being honest about it's all right to not have not be up all the time and not be positive, but there is that ebb and flow. But when you're in that kind of that place where you're out just outside that comfort zone, there is something that happens, something magical that occurs in life, right?
Yeah, agreed. I mean, there's a couple of thoughts around, yeah, sort of growing up in earlier years around that, different cultures and different experiences. Obviously, being in a wheelchair, you see life through quite a different prism to the average person. But on my mum's side, her dad, my grandfather, was from Lithuania and was a World War II veteran. So there's a lot of empathy I've got around that, sort of being displaced from the war and being from Eastern Europe, and my fiance Kasia is Polish, so there's definitely an Eastern European affinity there. And also when I was at university, the care team that were brought in by the university as kind of volunteers that were given accommodation and a little bit of spending money and food money, but it wasn't a salary, it was more structured like a voluntary experience, were global. I had, care support from a Colombian, Japanese, like really literally around the world. And so I think those types of things brought that different culture into my world. And even at university, I studied in Coventry near Birmingham, and the majority of my classmates were Muslim and Hindu. So there's kind of, even just growing up in Cambridgeshire and studying in Coventry, there were these experiences that taught me about how there is more to Cambridgeshire, shall we say. So I think that's definitely an interesting part of it. What's the point about Spain? So obviously when I knew I was going to be living, I was in the northwest of Spain, and I was thinking, oh great, it's going to be really warm sunshine in the winter while I'm getting away from Britain. And in this particular part of Spain, it's not actually that kind of weather, right? But it was beautiful mountains and just the nature there was astounding. So I had a great time. But I had to obviously have that home comfort of the hoist that lifts me out my wheelchair, a rolling shower, like the fundamentals I need just to live had to be in Spain. But for the first month or so, I was getting my mum to send baked beans because I couldn't get them in this part of Spain. But so I wanted to be very open and honest that, like, in the end, I love that discomfort, getting out the comfort zone, having the adventure. But there's always that little kind of midpoint where you want some of that comfort as well.
Yeah, we call it glamping now, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
It's so funny. You got to listen to my last show with Heather Atkinson. I don't know if you listened to that.
I haven't yet. I've got it.
She spent 5 weeks alone in Norway, and she did the Wim Hof challenge.
Yeah.
But she's out there in a bikini, and she's really one of the most vibrantly beautiful women, inside and out, right? But she said, I said to her, "What's the hardest thing about 5 weeks alone?" She said, "Baked beans." She said, I didn't know if I could live without baked beans. So it's so funny you said that, right? And the other, look at how much things we have in common. My girlfriend's Lithuanian. So,
oh, wow.
She lives in Vilnius. We met at an airport in Germany.
Wow,
we
nice.
bumped into each other, right? And so that was 4 years ago. So I spent a lot of time in that Eastern culture. And it's as you were talking about it, I got that sort of deep sense. Sadly,
have you met her parents? Yeah.
Oh yeah. I've been over there quite a lot. And it's funny, the first time, you may have had this experience, right? And I love the Polish. I mean, you talk about your fiance being Polish. I have a lot of Polish friends, and I don't know what it is. There's a joy in the Polish people that I always, wherever I'm around them, I get. And maybe it's an authenticity piece as well. I don't know. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. No, I totally get it. Totally. Yeah. I know, because I was going to ask you about language as well, because whenever we before COVID again, but would go for like a whole month every summer. So I picked up quite a lot of the language. I do. That's what I said to you earlier. I love travel partly with the language, and I love picking up that sort of local lingo. But I somehow in Polish always managed to say something. So I said to her grandma about picking a mushroom in the forest, but the word for mushroom and prostitute are really similar. So I was on about picking prostitutes in the forest.
It'd be funny if she said, actually, that's the wrong place. You have to go on the street.
Yeah, around the corner.
Totally the wrong place. Martyn, what's a question you think I could have asked you before we sort of wrap this one up? And again, I really want you to come back. I think there's so many other things I'd love to chat about. But is there a question that you think I could have asked you right now that we can tie a bow on this thing?
No, I mean, the main thing is I want everyone listening to get some value and insight out of it. And I think we've covered a lot of different things for people to digest. But yeah, when you asked me what could I tell the listeners, that for me was perfect, because I believe in service and giving other people things that benefit them.
Yeah. And, you say dream big. I wonder what is one of your big dreams right now? I know marriage and moving down into that, that new chapter. I always think in chapters. I don't think of life. I think of these chapters, and each chapter is unique. But what's one of the big dreams you've got going on?
So I think part of your point about the silence between the notes, that I think I'm having a bit of that time in certain life parts. So I've been very head down with this new agency, and so that's maybe to a degree the current chapter has been about getting this new business off the ground.
Is that Purple Goat? Is that
Purple Goat? Yeah. So that the story behind the name is that there's a global influencer marketing agency called The Goat, meaning greatest of all time. That's sort of the acronym of it. And then purple is synonymous with disability. It's become the color very known for disability. So that's why it's Purple Goat, because we've partnered with The Goat agency. So yeah, there's some cool stuff going on there. We were meant to get married in May, but we had to put it back with all the stuff. The wedding's planned to be in Poland, so that hopefully next summer. And I've always loved the idea of being a dad, so I think some point down the road that would be pretty awesome.
Oh my God, what a lucky kids. Or kids, let's say kids. How old are you, by the way? I have no idea.
37, so
I've got socks older than you. Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're going to have a Polish wedding, you better get your liver ready. You better.
I was going to say with the vodka.
That's what I was going to tell you. A quick story so I walk into my girlfriend's parents' home, and they live in a little tiny village called Akmana in Lithuania. Uh-huh. And I'd never seen this before, and I've seen so many cultures, but this is the first time in Lithuania. And they were under Russian rule for 50 years. Yeah. And so, music was banned, church was banned. So, but the thing people had was vodka, the thing that kept people together. So I walk in the kitchen, and there's the father, the mother, the grandmother, the other grandmother, the two sisters. They're all standing in a circle. And, I'd learned enough Lithuanian to say, hey, I'm sorry, I don't speak. Everyone's like, oh, even if you try, right? Anyway, so the father's standing with a great big bottle of vodka and this little tiny glass. It's like this small. And he pours it, and I think, that's nice. He's going to pass me a drink, right? Because I'm the guest. And he stands there, and he's talking in Lithuanian, and my girlfriend's translating. And after, what seemed like an eternity, he took a shot. And he fills up the glass and the bottle, and he passes it to his mother. And this takes about 40 minutes for the glass to get to me, right? And each one of them sat and talked. And that bottle, that little tiny glass, is what we shared the entire night. Wow. And it became synonymous for me about, gathering, togetherness. Yeah. And I thought, what a beautiful way to share alcohol together. If you're going to have a drink, that you pour the drink for the person, and you pass both the bottle and the drink to them, and they take as long as they want to sip it. They can sip it, they can down it, they can sit for 10 minutes with it, and no one else is drinking. And it was just really beautiful. I can't explain it and the feeling I felt, but I was just mesmerized by that, how that little tiny glass connected us all night. And when someone was done drinking, like the grandmother didn't want anymore, she kept the glass there for a while. She still had a little chat, and then she passed both on without drinking. So she still was included. It was so beautiful, right?
That's nice. Yeah, there's something, those sort of rituals that we often sit around the fire in the Kasha's parents' garden for hours and play guitar, and I've got a harmonica, and just that real kind of ritual and bonding is so beautiful.
Yeah. Well, talking about that, I'm looking forward to our friendship. I can tell that we're going to become friends, and I look forward to that. And anything I can do, let me know, and just let me know when you want to come back, and we'll have another chat. But thank you so much. I appreciate you. Any last thoughts or comments before we close this out?
No, apart from I need to go get a vodka in a minute because you got me thirsty. No, seriously, no, it's like really enjoyed the chat, and as you say, I think this is going to be the first of many interesting chats to come.
Yeah, awesome. And everyone, just remember, this is about my extra mile. So it's little tiny incremental steps, those little tiny incremental learnings. You know, I learned a lot today in nuances, and that really can help me and empower me to walk through this world where everyone is a person, whole people are people. And that really is sort of, I got goosebumps at the beginning of the show. I've got them to end the show. So enjoy it, and we'll definitely see you on the other side.